Thanks for coming out. My name's Karina Marshall. I coordinate the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative, and I'm hosted there to do that at a local nonprofit called the Ember Alliance, which is based out of Fort Collins but works nationally. So what I'm going to do is maybe set the stage a little bit for all the different things that are going on regionally in Northern Colorado. And then as the presentations go, we're going to zoom in. But really wanted to kind of think about the lens of prescribed fire from kind of the bigger fire issues that we're having in this region. So this is just our footprint of where we work. So I usually tell people Wyoming border down to I-70 along the Front Range, and then Grand County on the western slope. So these are basically the outline that you're seeing is the watersheds that intersect with the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest and Rocky Mountain National Park as our major federal partners. Then we have some state lands, a lot of private land, and then some county kind of local land in here. So what we're really trying to do is across all of these different partners work on wildfire issues so that Forest Service isn't doing one thing in isolation, local county isn't doing something else. We're trying to do so together across jurisdictional boundaries. The way we kind of break this down operationally, because obviously a project in Greeley isn't relevant to Clear Creek along I-70, they're not going to contiguously plan that whole area. We kind of break things down by watershed. So this is basically the way that we kind of break up our groups to think about wildfire issues, community engagement, and actual project implementation on the ground, as well as some kind of joint funding opportunities. And that's just kind of the schematic of how we work. We do community education and outreach, not trying to replace any local organization, but kind of support anyone who's engaging with you all to do so together and kind of share messaging and tools and resources so that each individual small nonprofit isn't having to go it alone, but we can do so across all of our different agencies. So I wanted to bring this one up because, again, when we're kind of talking about that regional picture, the place setting for why are we talking about doing prescribed fire here, is we're thinking about the scale of the recent fires that we've had. These are some recent fire scars or fire footprints. Is this a laser? Oh, nice. This is the East Troublesome that started in Grand County. This guy is Cameron Peak. And then this is High Park from 2012-ish. And then you'll see there's a smattering of others across the Front Range and on the West Slope. But one of the things that made us want to work in this kind of large landscape collaboration around wildfire issues is that these fires cross all sorts of jurisdictions, and we were not kind of treating the scale of the problem. Doing a 1 acre of somebody's land here and a little Forest Service treatment over there disconnected, really not making a difference for fire behavior on the landscape. And that applies both in kind of the mountainous forested landscapes as well as in our grassland environments. If we're doing things kind of disjunct and in isolation, they don't have as great of an impact. So why we're doing this at the big scale that we're doing it is because it's really about kind of that social problem, both our publics, our professional partners, hi, and our fire response agencies all working together. So this is just all of our different partners.
Sorry, I had to laugh.
Yeah, so we have federal, state, local. So by local, I mean county, city, fire service, your local fire department or fire protection district. And then we have different nonprofit partners. For example, here, pretty much each watershed in our landscape has a nonprofit associated with it. So here we have the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed that really thinks about all of the different work in that watershed, both relating to water quality issues and water specific habitat, but also thinking about upstream and uphill from the water system on how fire is going to interact with that system, both before, during, and most importantly after they do a lot of our recovery work. So that kind of makes up the fabric of who we have, and each part of the fireshed is a little bit different. For example, Larimer County has a lot more resources and agencies working on wildfire issues than Clear Creek County or Gilpin County. They're working on it, and the fireshed is somewhere where we try to bring everyone along, and where we don't have the resources to kind of do community outreach or do fuel projects to think about wildland fire on the landscape. We're trying to foster that so that folks can work on their local water quality issues, and we're not kind of really stacked in one part of the fireshed and low capacity in the other. So the fireshed's goals, as I've kind of been alluding to, are really all around wildfire mitigation, but I wanted to get maybe a little bit more specific because it really relates to why we're involved with this group of folks and this particular prescribed fire. So I mentioned building networks. That's kind of a no-brainer for a collaborative group. But we also really, really want to be increasing the understanding of using these tools on the landscape, whether that might be thinning or post-fire restoration or prescribed fire. Prescribed fire on the landscape is our most useful tool, and it is one of our tools that we've kind of lost out of the toolbox over the course of history in this particular part of the world. Other parts of the country have kind of a culture where they've never lost prescribed fire on the land, but this is something that's been practiced by humans on the landscape and in relationship to the landscape since there were humans here in any part of the world. I think one thing that's a huge misconception I hear a lot is that it's just fires that used to happen pre-colonization were just lightning, and that's really not true. Humans have been using fire as a way to tend to the land and protect water quality in their communities for time immemorial. So we are really wanting to see an increase in prescribed fire in northern Colorado in our collaborative landscape, because we know that it is the best tool when fires do happen. So when wildfires run into prescribed fires, they tend to have the greatest success rate of any treatment that we can do on the landscape. So sometimes we cut trees in the mountainous landscapes, for example, to thin the forest and reduce fire behavior. And there's evidence that that is the case. But when you thin and then add prescribed fire, your success rate goes way, way up, because you're reinstating that natural process and you're burning up the fuels on the ground. You're not just removing some trunks of trees, you're not redistributing the fuels, you're actually removing it from the landscape and allowing that natural cycle to happen. So just a couple more things on prescribed fire, and then I'll tie it back to kind of the collaborative picture and how this all fits in. But last couple of things I wanted to mention, I got ahead of myself as usual, is that prescribed fire is also a really cost-effective way to manage land. It is a natural process that is part of the landscape, and so restoring it is a really great way to not need to do all sorts of other treatments. There may be other needs. So for example, in certain forested landscapes, we may need to do some thinning for firefighter safety during a prescribed fire. We've been talking this week about noxious weeds and how we may need to do treatment before or after in conjunction with prescribed fire, that it's not kind of this silver bullet cure-all, but it does really great work on the landscape. As I mentioned, the typical response of a wildfire running into a prescribed fire treatment is that it makes it safer for firefighters. It makes our opportunities for fighting that fire greater, and it typically has greater or better ecological outcomes. So that's not to say there are never, you couldn't find one example of a prescribed fire that a wildfire interacted with that had some water quality issues, but in general, statistically, over all prescribed fires, that's where you tend to see the greatest reduction in those ecological hazards, whether that's wildlife habitat, water quality, things like that, where we're really wanting to see not just community protection, but kind of those ecological benefits restored to landscape as well. I think that was my last slide, so I'm going to go back to this real quick. So before I wrap up, I just wanted to kind of hit home the point that there is this large community of practitioners, both folks who are really concerned with natural resources management, fire response, kind of effective and safe fire response, and kind of thinking about the broad landscape for ecological health, water quality, air quality. And all of these different partners have different perspectives to bring. So one particular agency may have certain values that they're going to bring to a prescribed fire on why they might want to carry that out. They might have a certain species that they're considering that depends on fire. They might have a particular community that they're trying to protect. So when you think about prescribed fire, I really encourage you to think about all the different kind of values that this can help and hit on, and know that there is this large collaborative organization working to kind of work through all those different values with different organizations and meet the needs of, you know, our ecological benefits, our community protection, and kind of everything in between. So I'll stop there.
I'm Gabriela. I work for the City of Greeley in our Natural Areas and Trails Division as a restoration specialist. You may have seen me on some of the sites. I do all of our chemical and vegetation management, along with site assessments and prescribed burns, hopefully soon. So we're going to be talking about what goes into a burn. Just very briefly, the next presentation will be going more in depth on that and safety protocols, things like that, burn plans. Also our partners, why we are looking at using prescribed burning as a management tool on our landscape, and then also prescribed burn sites for the near future. So what goes into a burn? Before we can start any sort of burning, natural areas and trails, for us to be able to restart our program, we had to build a lot of partnerships. Part of that was with Ember Alliance and the TREX program. Greeley Fire also has a large portion of this in helping us implement the burns and helping us write burn plans. Other partners would be Greeley Stormwater for areas that we would be burning in the future, and then also Army Corps of Engineers, specifically at Signature Bluffs, which is the burn you guys are here to listen about. So for our staff, for planning, 4 of our staff members have our Firefighter 2 certificates, baseline of what we need to be able to be on a fire, along with our pack tests, and a few of us are working on our red cards so we can actually help implement these burns. But other than that, we are also looking for partner resources through Ember Alliance, Greeley Fire, to actually help us with the burns. And then for burn plans, there are multiple reasons on why NAT wants to burn our natural areas and trails. That's what I will be covering, and then burn plans and site-specific management will be, like I said, in the next presentation. So for the why of why we burn. Grassland ecosystems have evolved with fire as a cultural tool. So Karina was talking about how fire was started with lightning strikes, but it's not just that. It was also part of indigenous practices on how to manage these grassland ecosystems. But grasslands are very dynamic, meaning that they change with various factors over time. So not every prescribed burn will be the same, and we can't treat it the same. Every site has a different goal for management, and that's what we have to analyze before we start looking at if we can even, or if we want to implement prescribed burning as a management tool. A couple reasons for the benefit of prescribed burning would be to reduce above ground biomass or thatch, which I'll get more into later, discourage and actually encourage weed invasion. And I know encouraging weed invasion sounds a little traumatizing, but I'll explain that more also later. Woody encroachment, specifically in wetland areas, but all of our grasslands, we don't want them to turn into forests. That's not the goal of what a grassland is. We also are looking at recycling plant nutrients, stimulating new growth, and then helping with plant succession. So again, for some of the reasons of why we use prescribed burning, it is to decrease weed pressure, improve the site condition and heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is a diverse mix of species and also just variables on the landscape. There will be a picture on the next slide kind of to show you what exactly that means. And then we also want to create a shifting mosaic. Again, just a diversity on the landscape. And so a way that we do this is through management and maintenance of our natural area sites. This is done through an integrated pest management plan or an IPM plan, which we are working on for all of our areas, which can include a range of tools, including chemical, biological, cultural, and mechanical methods. And fire is the one cultural tool that, like we had talked about, it's not currently being used on our system, but it is the one very crucial component that we want to reinstate. So for weed management, we all know that weeds are not very easy to control or even to suppress. So by using an integrated pest management plan and having prescribed burn and then following with mechanical or another cultural tool of grazing, we can really help suppress weeds that way. Not just using one form of a management tool, but like a two-punch system. It just gives us a better chance for that. And there are three ways I have identified for how prescribed fire can help with weed control. The first one being that fire stimulates seed, so native seed, but also weed seed. And if we create the flush of seed, we are taking that out of the seed bank. And after that, we can follow up with the mechanical tools like mowing. We can also follow up with chemicals. And so it's just giving us a wider control of the pest in 1 year than we would have to do over multiple years. That not being said, we won't have to follow up in multiple years. We still will have to. It will just be a greater management that first year. And then prescribed burning will also help remove the thatch. You'll hear thatch a lot in this presentation, but again, that above ground biomass. So when we do that, on some of our sites, we want to be able to apply that chemical. Some of that is a pre-emergent, so we apply the chemical to the soil and help kill the weeds as they start to germinate and emerge. We can also help with the thatch removal for a post-emergent. So once the weeds have already come up, it's easier to detect them faster. And then lastly, fire also stimulates the native plants as well as the weeds. So the native vegetation can help compete against the weed species. And this is just one example of how our IPM plan could work on this system. On the right-hand image, you can see one of our seasonals covered in dense cattail thatch. But yes, so in cattail systems, there are List A species, and List A species are mandated by the Colorado Department of Agriculture for us to have to manage. And it's very difficult to see them in nature, but hairy willowherb and purple loosestrife are the two that we have on our systems. We have thousands of plants. This takes up a lot of our time, a lot of staff capacity, other staff resources. So being able to remove the thatch will, one, open up the soil to help with the emergence of native vegetation, but it will also help us move through this cattail system, monoculture, and survey for and treat the plants, which we have to do, but we can do it faster. And so then we can spend our resources and staff time managing trail sides and other things like kochia, which I know everyone hates. So again, pesky thatch removal. Thatch is good in small amounts, but like you saw in the other picture, when it starts getting excessive like that, then it's crowding out other things. And it's creating a monoculture, which is again, not what we want. So by removing the dense plant material, we are also helping remove the fuel load on a site. Cattails can burn very easily when they're like that. And so by removing that through fire, we are eliminating other potential fire risk in the future when there's an unplanned burn. So one was the fire mitigation, and then we also have the stormwater functionality of ponds that we have to think about. In detention ponds, we want to hold the water and then be able to move it from inlets and outlets. If the dense mats of cattail are in the pond, then the water is getting absorbed and it's not moving how it's supposed to. So by burning up this mat, we are allowing for better water movement and also stimulating the new growth of the cattails, which we can then treat with chemicals, but also the new growth will help filter out water, filter the water. So in this picture, you can see in the right-hand side what heterogeneity looks like. Basically, just difference in plant successional stages. You also can have, through a burn, well, hold on. Let me refocus for a second. So by increasing the habitat heterogeneity, we are decreasing the monocultures. And again, this is through the maintenance and the management. But in order to do this, we don't want to burn a full site in 1 year whenever it is possible. And so when we do that, the part that gets burned has the removed thatch, has more bare ground, which is good for a lot of our pollinator species. It's also good for ground nesting birds. But the sections of the site that have not been burned can be used as a wildlife refuge. It can also be used as standing dead vegetation that other wildlife species can use for their nests and forage. And then again, going back to that burned area, the new growth can be used for our grazers, so like our deer. If we do burn a whole site in 1 year, we are risking, what's the word I'm looking for? We're risking site species extinction, or we could be, if the wildlife species don't have another place to migrate to. And then in the bottom over here, you can see our red-winged blackbirds forming a nest in the cattails. When we don't burn a whole site in 1 year, we are leaving the dead cattails for their spring nests. Again, why we don't want to burn a whole site in 1 year. So for Signature Bluffs, this is our 3-year burn plan. This is not going to be a consecutive burn. It might be, it doesn't have to be. That's all based on weather conditions, if it's the right time of year to burn, like we had talked about previously. But this is basically what we'll be seeing. Year 1 is what we are planning for this fall 2024. If the conditions are not right, then maybe spring 2025. And then year 2 and year 3 to follow. But this just shows you a breakdown of how a site could be split up. Part of the reason, or the reasons why we decided to burn on this site was one, again, for the thatch removal. Also, decreasing the thatch will help with the application for our invasive species like our leafy spurge and our Canada thistle. Also for kochia, which is not a noxious weed, but still a weed. In our year 2 and our year 1 areas, the Army Corps of Engineers reseeded for their project in 2019 and 2020. And so we're giving it enough time and now creating a disturbance that will hopefully create a flush of native seed. And if not, then we can manage the weeds on the site, which will then help the native seed establish for future years. And in year 3, which is a wetland area, we are looking to stop woody encroachment on part of it. So just a quick summary, prescribed burn, like we had talked about, requires a lot of partnerships, a burn plan, and a lot of planning, but it is very good for our ecosystem in helping manage weeds and creating the heterogeneity on a site. And it will also be used as part of our integrated pest management plan to help with wildlife habitat and different species diversity.
My name is Brian Eisen. I'm the community educator for the Greeley Fire Department. So after Chief Gilbert's done talking, I'll be kind of talking about some of our safety messages specific to the residents of the area, as well as some of our communications plans for the burns.
All right. So an overview, you've seen the maps of Signature Bluffs. Give you a background of how we got to where we're at. The process, the planning to implementation takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months just for the planning and approval side of it, and then we're able to implement. So the burn plan that we currently have for Signature Bluffs, I authored. I have a second person, a third party that comes in and they conduct a technical review of that burn plan to make sure the information that I put in meets the standards for burn plans. And then the last piece is the city of Greeley signs it off as the agency administrator. If anybody's interested, I did bring the draft burn plan. You can plug it in to somebody's computer and I can walk you through what that looks like. But the burn plan covers everything from, in this case, is why are we doing it? What's the purpose of even thinking about utilizing prescribed fire? That's where we work with the city of Greeley, Natural Areas and Trails, on they give us their resource management objectives that Gabriella talked about, into what are the parameters that we have to follow to even utilize prescribed fire. So that's our prescription, and that goes everywhere from time of year, weather conditions, resource availability, things of that nature. The next piece of it is we get into the resources. So in this burn plan, I tell the city of Greeley to even put fire on the ground or implement prescribed fire, you have to have this list of resources at a minimum. And that includes personnel, their qualifications, and types of fire apparatus, engines, water tenders, UTVs, things of that nature. And then from there, we build into the plan what are the requirements for what we call the ignitions plan, the holding plan. Those are the people that make sure it stays in the box. Follow that up is the mop up, so we go in and clean up and make sure that the fire stays in the box, and then patrol. So we have days of patrol to drive around and make sure it's still doing what it's supposed to do. Before we even think about implementing prescribed fire, we don't look just at the day of. We forecast, and we do long-range forecasting. So we look, say in 2 weeks I wanted to start looking at putting fire on the ground. I work with the National Weather Service to start doing spot weather forecasts. So they're giving me some history of what's going on in the area for me to start assessing, is this going to match what we put in as our prescription or the parameters for us to implement prescribed fire. If the answer is yes, then I also look at 5 to 7 days beyond that to go, is there anything that's going to happen 5 to 7 days beyond when we put prescribed fire on the ground that's going to cause us concern? So when we're thinking about ever putting fire on the ground, we are truly looking at 2 weeks of total time to make sure that we're doing things the right way. So as we like to say, is we plan the work, but we're going to work the plan. And that's what the intent of that plan is to do. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into even making this a viable option of utilizing prescribed fire. Not just the fire, we also consider the smoke. Is the smoke going to lift? Is it going to hold to the ground? So on and so forth. So a lot goes into that planning side of it.
So once again, my name is Brian. I'm here with Greeley Fire Department. I also have Lieutenant Wadler over here. He is one of our key members in coordinating Greeley Fire's efforts with this whole project. What I'm going to go into now is Greeley Fire's role here, as well as some of our safety concerns and some communication points as well. So Greeley Fire will be supporting this project in not only the management of the entire project, but also ensuring the safety of the area right here, the personnel here, and then also the surrounding areas as well. So our Greeley firefighters, as part of their standard training, will all receive the wildland qualifications they need to in order to be able to act in these areas. So I want you to be confident that our firefighters here are able to provide the necessary and appropriate fire suppression services as needed. The Greeley Fire personnel that are going to be tasked for these burns will be committed to it for the entire duration of the burn. So we're not going to be called in at any point. We're going to be there from basically beginning to end, making sure that these fires are contained and controlled as needed. It's important to note that Greeley Fire staffing of these burns won't reduce our ability to respond to calls throughout the rest of the city. It's important that we maintain that ability at the same time as ensuring the safety here. Just to reiterate, safety here is our top priority, and that is the safety of the personnel on site, the safety of the surrounding community, and the safety of the land itself. So just to reiterate further, these burns are only going to occur if they can occur in a safe manner. So we're going to be looking at things like weather conditions, looking at the temperature, humidity, the wind speeds, directions, and making sure that when these burns do go off, that they are being handled in a controlled manner. We are also going to make sure we have the adequate amount of staffing in order to protect the area, make sure that it is able to be controlled and managed appropriately here. Now, with any fire, we have the risk of smoke going into certain areas. So it is important to note that with these fires burning, we are going to have potentially large amounts of smoke being produced. Now, a part of the plan is to try to mitigate that. So looking at winds and just the area to make sure we can let that smoke get away from us in the safest way possible. With that being said, there is the potential for smoke to drift into the surrounding communities, into roadways. And so we want to make sure that people are aware of that and that they're able to take precautions for that smoke in case it does come into your area. So a few things. When these burns are occurring, if you are sensitive to smoke, or if you know people that are sensitive to smoke, it's important to remember to stay indoors, stay out of the smoke as much as we can. We don't want to irritate our respiratory tracts. We don't want to have any potentially preventable conditions occurring if we can get ahead of it. If you are of that nature where you do have a sensitive respiratory system, it might be worth looking into things like a HEPA filter, so high efficiency particulate absorbing filters. Those can be placed into your HVAC systems. That will help to purify the air coming into your homes further. When you're driving through these areas, simple things like rolling up your car, turning on the recirculation system in your car's air system to make sure that you're not taking in that smoky air. And then also, if you have family, friends in the area, just organize some check-ins. Make sure they know to call and check up on you to make sure you're doing okay during these times. Now, once again, we are still providing our normal 911 services. So if you or anybody that you know of is experiencing any type of respiratory distress, heat stress, or any kind of effects related to these fires, please call 911, have us come out and check you out if we need to transport you to the appropriate facilities, okay? So talking about communications, Greeley Fire will also be handling the day of communications to let you know and notify you that these burns are occurring. We'll be doing this through our social media channels. Those are the easiest and also basically the best reach that we have to get out to the masses in Greeley. So over here on the right-hand side, you can see our 3 account names. So we have our Facebook, our Instagram, and then also our X or our Twitter account names there. We ask that you please follow those. And for those in the surrounding communities, you let other people know to follow that and look at that as well. Just with the nature of the way that these notifications are going to be put out, this is the most timely way, and like I said, the easiest way to do it, to get that information out as quickly as we can, and also the medium to respond to questions if they're given. I wish I could tell you that we are going to have a standardized way of saying, this far ahead of each burn, we're going to put out a message. But with the nature of weather changing, we all know how weather patterns here tend to change quite frequently. We're just going to say that looking towards these social media accounts and looking for these notifications you put up is going to be the most reliable way of knowing when these burns are occurring. And then just to give you an example, this is going to be what these notifications will look like. So you'll see this notification, you'll see the specific area where these burns are occurring, and then we'll also have our contact information down there as well.